Okay, so we're gonna talk about the hackathon actually. So part of the hackathon that's coming up for the content editor, there's a few issues that I came across, and maybe we can use that as I'll share my screen in 2 seconds here. Yeah. Let me share my screen. That's the right one. Okay, cool. So the editor group is hackathons coming up, and the reason of this call, this sync session, was that I saw that there were these two main issues, like the content editor and issues and content editor and comments. So this is the one in issues and the one in comments. And at the moment, there's no real description yet. And I think part of this discussion will help shape out what we put in these description areas. When I first saw this, I was thinking about how the content editor might play in the experience of editing. So my assumption of this issue was like we were thinking that the content editor would come to like replace and or add a way to edit issue descriptions using the content editor features that we've implemented. And the same thing with like comments. It's like changing this thing so that it has the abilities that we've have in the content editor, so that people don't have to write in Markdown, but there's always going to be a fallback so people can write in Markdown. Yeah, so that was my assumption. Is that a correct assumption? Like, is that what you two were thinking about when you saw these two issues, or were you thinking of something else?
Yeah, I think that I share that assumption.
Okay.
It's just like bringing the container as an editing alternative in both places.
Okay, cool. All right, so this is like a breakdown of kind of like where we're at, where we might go, who knows. But at the moment, this is our wiki experience, and we have this way to toggle like rich text or edit source, and that's the thing that swaps back and forth between content editor and the raw markdown. A few months ago, we were talking about trying to make this edit rich text a little bit more prominent, and we kind of landed on this source enriched text kind of segment control, where you toggle between the two, and that determines your state. I think this is a good opportunity to kind of like revisit this whole thing and potentially just like collaborate on this, because I know that you two both have worked on the content editor extensively and are very familiar with the UI there. So you might have some ideas of how to implement it better as we move into the world of like combining it so that it works in here. Like how might I switch from this view to the content editor view? I kind of proposed this kind of idea here, but Enrique, thank you for this note here. Did you want to talk a little bit about your note here to explain why this approach may be good in theory, but maybe not ready yet for full implementation?
Sure. So what the perception that I have about this mode of having the container as a tab alongside the markdown source editor is that you can use the rich text, the container, as a preview, as a way of getting a preview of how the markdown is displayed when you save the changes. However, the container is still an editor. It's a WYSIWYG editor, and in some situations that are actually like very edge cases, they are like really like exceptional situations. The container still introduces some changes into the markdown to, let's say, like, because when you are like displaying a document in a WYSIWYG editor, that document should follow or conform with some rules of how the document should be structured. And Markdown is a language that is very flexible, and it allows, for example, any kind of HTML. So there will be some cases where it's inevitable that the container could modify the structure, the original structure of the document. And in those situations, the container cannot act as a preview of what the user is typing in the source mode. So that's my biggest concern. Like, can we get rid of the preview and replace it completely with the container when the container may change the original structure of the document?
Yeah, one big example of this is that, the diagrams.
Mhm.
So Morbid diagrams and all other kinds of diagrams in the preview, it just shows the diagram, but in the container, it shows both the diagram and the code. So yeah, that's one example.
Okay, those are that's a really good solid example of how we kind of surface those more complex types that have visualization options to them. Cool. So I'm happy to kind of not replace preview. Don't replace preview with rich text. I'm just gonna make a note for now. That's cool. I think that's good. I love your cursor says like visiting spider. As someone in Australia, that's kind of like a scary thing, like spiders flying around my screen, but it's all good. Cool. I'm fine with that. I'm just gonna put this note up here for now. And then I was just exploring this without something that Himanshu you kind of brought up is like if we do continue adding stuff to the tabs that this this toolbar might get too long, and potentially we may need to like truncate this into like a drop down. This is like a recent icon that was added. It's like for titles and things like that, and I think as a short kind of like MVC kind of approach, we could reuse that if we needed to truncate this toolbar. But I think the scope of this conversation is that we're focused more about this part here, the whole toggling between markdown, rich text, and preview. Because if we nail that, then we can, it's something that we could like experiment with in the content editor and then like translate it over to issues and comments if we need that. Yes, I like this thinking from Himanshu. And let's play around with that. Because what Himanshu is pointing out to here is that like currently we have attach a file in here, but there is an issue out there that suggests, hey, why don't we move this attach a file to become a action button up here and like a button insert diagram. And we kind of visualize this here where this is like attached file or image. The paperclip is like a good option here. We had a small survey and people said, yeah, if attaching files or images, this paperclip would be fine. But recently, I also explored some other ones that kind of combine concepts, but I think that's a finer detail that we can look into later. So how about putting a preview button here? That's not a bad idea. This is the most crude button ever, but why not? Yeah. Cool. So, what were you thinking with preview here, Himanshu? Like, what would happen if you press this?
It would just replace the markdown with the preview, and then the preview button changes to something like close preview. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So my next question, I guess, would be, I know you just kind of, I'm putting you on the spot here, but then let's say I toggle these two. What happens up here? Is it kind of doesn't do anything, or does it?
No, it just stays there. It's like markdown stays there, but instead of the markdown, you see a preview of the markdown. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that that preview button should works for both markdown and rich text modes. Like I think it's a shared functionality.
What happens if this was somewhere up in the toolbar? Would that make sense, or would that?
Yeah, it would make sense, but yeah. Yeah, so the idea is that it should be a different action button and not a tab. So it doesn't matter where it is.
Okay.
But I don't think you need a preview with the rich text editor.
That's exactly what we were discussing before. Like, if the rich text editor is not exactly what the user sees when they are viewing the document in read-only mode, then we should provide that view as well for both editing modes. Or at least,
if
the
rich text editor, if the rich text editor supports a read-only view, then it should be exactly like the preview. We should make sure. For example, for the diagrams, it should not render the code at all. If in the read-only mode.
Yeah, but then if we have a markdown view with a preview mode, and we have a rich text mode with a read-only mode, what is the difference between the preview and the read-only mode?
There's
Maybe
no
we can
difference.
consolidate. Yeah, we can consolidate both functionalities in a single concept. That will be the preview for both of them.
Yeah, that makes sense. If we can have a read-only mode for the rich text editor, yeah, we can use it as a preview.
When would how would you invoke the read-only mode for the rich text editor?
I mean, we don't support it right now, but we could do it.
Is it the reading in the viewing mode in the wiki where you before you click edit, or how do you see that being different or the same?
It's a Well, that view is rendered by the backend. But this one would be like front end rendered. Mm. But yeah, the principle of like WYSIWYG is like the preview looks exactly like the restructure editor. So if it doesn't, then it's not WYSIWYG.
It's rich text. Okay. Let's play around with this concept of putting buttons at the bottom. At the moment in the content editor, for reasons of simplicity, we kind of like, we don't have anything at the bottom at the moment. Our world kind of lives in like the toolbar and like lots of actions through the bubble menu. Should we have like a footer area for the content editor? I'm just thinking out loud here. Is like, should we emulate this pattern of having a preview and stuff like that for the content editor, or should we not?
I don't think
if
so.
we
We should.
were, oh, sorry, Himash. I also would say like if we were starting to implement the classic markdown editor from scratch, would you make that decision of putting like actions in the footer besides putting the actions in the toolbar, or would you just like, would you make the decision of moving the attached files and the preview button to the toolbar?
That's a
I
good
think
question.
like from the point of view of if we are like, if we would revisit that anyway.
Yeah. A thought has come up in the past with like inserting items that like one potential approach would be having formatting tools and inserting actions kind of separate. You see that in some applications where they kind of separate the two. Whether that's the right way or not, that's a whole other ball game. But the kind of concern I kind of have with like preview and close, as simple as it is like, I don't know what happens to the top here. It feels strange to have the actions still available if you do preview. Once you're done the preview, then it's like, yeah, you can surface this, but it feels a little bit strange to have preview, but these things still visible.
Maybe we can also have the preview in a modal, and then people can explicitly close the modal to hide the preview. And yeah. And perhaps in the future, we can also have like a side-by-side thing. That's kind of ambitious, but in that case, like Markdown and restrict both are editable at the same time.
No, not too crazy. Because one thing that we haven't really talked about too much is like the full screen mode. This is something that we're going to talk about later in the future, but yeah, side-by-side view, that's when you have the real estate for that, definitely, to play around with concepts like that. Cool. Um, hmm. Okay. If I was gonna go and start thinking about, you know, where does this preview button go? Like let's say I stick it at the bottom or somewhere at the top. What won't work? Like what's a big red flag? Because I know that we don't want to rewrite some aspects to the design, to the whole content editor experience, integrating this. Is there anything that I should watch out as a designer to like don't implement it like this because it will require a lot of refactor of the code to implement it?
Well, that I'm thinking like first, I don't think that we should like avoid the refactoring if we want like to implement that ideal design. But what I'm thinking is like we have to split this conversation into parts. Like,
Okay.
what do we want to achieve in the context of the hackathon, and what do we want to achieve long term? Because if we are like, if we were planning this effort as a quarterly goal or a 6-month goal, I would say, yeah, let's go for it, because this is probably the best way of doing it. And it's cost effective based on the time that we have. But if we think about these designs in the context of a single week swarm between everyone in the team, where only 2 engineers are actually familiarized with the code base and the content editor, what do we want to achieve, and what is the design that we want to include in the hackathon? That's the way that I'm thinking about this.
Okay. All right. So let me then focus on this. So for the hackathon, what don't we want to do that will cause grief?
Yeah, the idea of hackathon is mostly that you are free to do whatever you want, kind of without any constraints. So you don't really have to depend on the design or even uh, like you should be able to do things that are not conventionally okay to do. I mean, it can be a bad code which doesn't really go well in master, so you should be able to do things like that.
Okay. Silly question on my side. The code that we come up with during the hackathon, would that be something that would be releasable behind a feature flag or something like that? Like, would that be an end result, or is there more like a proof of concept that we would end at? Like, where is the line? Like, what is done for a hackathon from the engineering side?
The idea is that we come up with like proof of concept and like something that we can show, and then eventually we focus on like releasing it to like
Okay.
over the next few weeks after the hackathon. Yeah.
Cool. Right, that makes sense to me. So free without constraints. All right. Okay. Would this make sense if I take what we chatted about today, come up with some designs, and then you two can provide feedback to see if you want to go harder on the solution, or you want to hold back on the solution for the hackathon, like over the time of next week, which is like 1 week before the hackathon, so that we kind of figure out kind of the scope, or like how free you want to be, or like for the solution for the hackathon.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that regardless of how we go about this and which constraints we apply, like perhaps that's something that we should discuss as a team in the hackathon week.
Okay. All right. All right. So that's my takeaway from here, is that I'll come up and mock up a few rough ideas for this, and then we can use that during the week of the hackathon to discuss, or if you have time next week to give any feedback on it, we can discuss it asynchronously next week, and then when we jump into the hackathon, hopefully, yeah, we're kind of like aligned prior to jumping into it. Sounds good?
Cool stuff.
Right. Anything else you wanted to add about this this kind of like toggling between preview stuff, or anything related to the hackathon? No. Okay, cool. So thank you very much for taking your time to discuss this. It's been helpful for me, and yeah, have a great rest of your day. Bye, guys.
All right, bye.